I have a 5 minute clip here for you, quite a long clip by my video standards, but I thought the information contained in the clip was excellent. And it was on the John Anderson YouTube channel, and he had Matt Goodwin on, and he was asking Mr. Goodwin, what do you think about this? The Islam thing and Muslims in Parliament and all of that. How are you thinking about that at the moment? And I thought Mr. Goodwin's answer was very thought-provoking, and he gives you an excellent outline, I think, of how he feels about sectarianism in British politics. And I thought it was an excellent clip.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Muslim population of Britain now is around 7 or 8%, and you could argue that they now control a significant number of seats in the Parliament, and with the likely doubling of their numbers over the next decade, they will control, presumably, even more seats. Now, so a democracy advocate might say that's a good thing, but the problem is if there's no shared heritage, if you're just a nation of tribes, if you don't have any commitment to the institutions of freedom, including democracy and the parliaments, how does that play out? Does it open the way for a really quite radical and permanent overturning of British society?
Well, if you look at the forecasts by reliable research centres like Pew, the Pew Research Centre, they forecast that Britain will be somewhere between 18 and 20% Muslim by the year 2050. So 1 in 5 people in the population will be Muslim by 2050, which really isn't that long away, not long at all. Obviously, in other countries, Sweden, it's much more dramatic. It's 31, 32%. I think France and Belgium are also a little bit higher than the UK. So the debates that we are starting to have now, 5 politicians being elected at the national general election last year, specifically on pro-Gaza, anti-Israel platforms, not even talking about domestic issues in Britain, just talking about the Middle East issue. The debates that we're having about the compatibility of Islam with free speech and free expression. We still have a secondary school teacher in this country in hiding because he showed an image in a class that was considered to be insulting to Muslims. That kind of gradual bearing down on individual rights, women's rights, our common law tradition through Sharia courts, I think that pressure will inevitably increase as these demographic trends play out. But what worries me more than that is the complete refusal and inability of anybody in Westminster to even have an open and frank discussion about what you could do to stop some of that from happening or try and get ahead of it. Even by us having this conversation, inevitably somebody will say, well, Matt is engaging in sensational, inflammatory discussion that is Islamophobic. That is the level of debate that we have in this country. You can't even come forward and say, okay, why don't we have a much more ambitious strategy for ensuring integration within these communities? I mean, if you read, for example, if there's one book I could recommend, which really made an impression on me, it was Ed Hussein's book, Among the Mosques, where he turned up at random to, I think, a few dozen mosques in the UK. He didn't tell people he was coming. And he finds very clear evidence of extremist ideology, pretty visible. He makes the point that if you're a young British Muslim, you can spend your entire day in many areas of the country, from waking up to going to school, to going to mosque, to hanging out in your neighborhood, never interacting at all with the non-Muslim British majority. And there are lots of neighborhoods like that in Birmingham, in Oldham, in northwest England, parts of London. And I still don't think we've even come close to reckoning with the collapse of civic integration in our country. It's been 24 years since we had riots across northern England, and Tony Blair's government said, okay, we've got to do something about the fact that people are living parallel lives. That was the phrase. People were living parallel lives. And as I look around today in the political and public debate, in some respects, we've gone backwards. We've not even moved forwards in terms of coming up with a serious response to what we're seeing. And you're right, John, to point to the trends. I mean, I've done surveys myself. About 40% of British Muslims say they would like a Muslim-only political party in British politics. And we have actually an organization called Muslim Votes, which tries to organize 4 million votes at UK elections, specifically along religious lines. We have slates of candidates in cities in Birmingham, for example, so-called independent candidates, but they are organized increasingly along Muslim lines. And very few people are willing to talk about it. And very few people are willing to say, well, this is sectarianism, like what we had in Northern Ireland, but it's now rearing its head in mainstream British politics and is now represented in the House of Commons.
As you may already know, the Islamic faith is quite uncompromising. It knows exactly what it wants. It's already thought about it in depth. And the religion of Islam isn't too bothered with you coming along and trying to find common ground with it. It is, after all, the final solution. And so, there can be no other religion apart from Islam. And I've had discussions with Muslims about this, and they say, yes, Islam is number one, and it's only a matter of time before we're all going to be Muslims. And that's their belief, and they are welcome to it. However, with regard to sectarianism, that moves it along to something that's a little bit different, because this is the very definition of sectarian politics. Because if you have a belief system that in essence is not interested in finding any common ground whatsoever, then what you're going to do is create opponents or enemies. There is no way to have a debate. So if you have a group of people over here who strongly believe in something and are not willing to compromise on anything, then that's really going to isolate the rest of the people. And so you've got opponents of it. Instead of finding common ground, finding a solution, you have an opponent. There's zero compromise here. And within this type of atmosphere, this creates extremism. And it's a system that may work for them and not for you. And so you're left out of that solution. What you say is irrelevant, and then it becomes simply a battle of wills as to see who's going to win. And unfortunately, within that, what this system creates is anger. The anger that people feel in such a system can very, very quickly lead to resentment, which very, very quickly leads to unrest. And when unrest happens in a society, when you have oppositional ideas going on and sectarianism is in full bloom, then you risk huge divisions in society. At its core, politics should be about ideas, debate. It should not be about identity. The exchange of free ideas in a society is very important, and that's because we all need to come up with a shared sense of what the best way forward is going to be. We all need to have a chat about that and say, you know what, let's go forward. What's this about this 2-child benefit cap that they want to remove? What do you think about that? And some people will say, yeah, that's all right. Some people will say no. And after a period of time, some people will go, oh, that's all right. And some people won't. But this is how societies move forward. And when you have a version of sectarianism, as we're seeing now with the Islamic faith moving into parliament, moving into large sections of our councils, etc., you are seeing an abandonment of an exchange of ideas, moving into an ideology related to religion that is completely uncompromising. And eventually, where that leads is to violence, either from the people that are opposing it or the people that want it to happen. And this is why sectarian politics is extremely dangerous. As outlined in the clip, we've already seen what happens in Northern Ireland, haven't we? We already know that. We have a history of that. We know what happens, and violence happens. And I don't see anything pretty coming out as a result of it. And I hope we can gradually move away from this. But as outlined in the video, I think for the moment, the demographics are only going to go one way. And I think we're heading for a little bit of trouble in the future. Thanks very much for your time.